In this video, we're going to be looking at some techniques for layering and EQing kick drum sounds. Sometimes some of the most effective techniques for mixing drums in this way are some of the simplest. All we'll be using in this video is a series of EQ applied to our kick drum sounds to help them sit in the mix much better. I've got these drums going in my project. The bass drum's got nice low end, but I'd like to do some EQ to sculpt out some of the mid-range to provide more space for vocals and the synth sounds. I'd also like to add an extra kick drum to the kick drum I've got in here already to provide a bit more high-end energy. I begin by soloing this bass drum and applying the EQ here to get rid of some of the mid frequencies. I'm also going to do a low cut. Using quite a steep filter slope, I'm going to sweep up to about 30 Hz, which is going to take away any of that low end rumble from this bass drum. I also find dipping some of the mid frequencies and low mid frequencies tends to soften the drum sound and provide more space for other elements. I've applied cuts at 90, 150 and about 300 Hz. Take out some of those lower mids. I can actually, using Pro Q2, bypass and unbypass multiple bands in one go. I think I need to apply a much bigger dip to some of the mid and higher mid frequencies on this bass drum sound. This will take out some of the transient as well as dipping a lot of that mid range. Using quite a wide Q, I'm actually dipping quite a lot now from the bass drum. I can mute and unmute the whole plugin and individual bands to hear what's being cut from the sound. Let's unsolo this bass drum now. Those cuts are providing more space for other elements in the mix, but I think I could do with another bass drum with a bit more transient, a bit more high frequency detail to help the bass drum cut through a bit more. Something else to consider using bass drum samples is the length of the sample. Considering I'm using a piece of audio here, I need to edit the actual audio region. Of course, if you were using a sample, you'd look at the envelope. Ideally, I'd like my bass drum to be about an 1/8 note long, so there's lots of space for sub-frequencies in between the bass drum hits. I can edit the tail of this bass drum here and also ensure it chops off at a 0 crossing, which will ensure a smoother tail. I'm also going to apply a small fade to the end to avoid any clicks. Now let's have a look at this transient drum I have in here, which has got a nice high frequency element. Really helps the bass drum cut through, but it's going to need some more EQing really. First thing is to cut away all that low frequency. We don't need that as we have it on the other bass drum. I'm also going to dip some of these mids here. And it sounds like the sample is maybe layered with a hi-hat. It has quite too much, it has a little bit too much high frequency, so I'm going to dip some of this. Again, applying quite a wide Q and dipping about 4 or 5 dB to take away that high frequency element. I often find with bass drum samples they tend to have a full frequency range, and most of the EQing I will use on these type of samples would be subtractive. The EQ is definitely helping the kick drum sit with the other low frequency bass drum and adding that more transient and mid and high frequency present bass drum, helping things cut through the mix a bit more. I still think the two bass drums together have too much mid frequency that is muddying up the mix. So I'm gonna have the two kick drums sent to the same bus channel, and I can apply some processing to them together here. Ordinarily, when you are layering bass drums in this way, you might knock the transient off the low frequency element, but because I did that big dip in the high mids, I've taken away a lot of that transient detail. Again, I'm going to attack the mid-range with the two bass drums bussed together here. The analyzer gives me quite a nice idea of where those frequency ranges are that I want to cut from this sound. And dipping those mid-range frequencies just makes the drum sounds a lot softer and a lot easier to fit in the mix. Again, this frequency range in the mids is where our synthesizer sounds or mid-range bass is going to be sitting, so we want to create space for those sounds. Let's try muting and unmuting some of these EQs to see what we're bringing or taking out from the sound. Also muting and unmuting the transient kick drum. You can hear that really helps the kick drum cut through the mix. And muting some of these EQ plugins that we've applied, we can hear just how cutting that mid-range from the bass drum makes a huge difference. That's all for now. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Any questions, please get in touch, and thanks for watching.